The scene is set not in a grand headquarters, but in the desolate quiet of a captured German airfield late in 1945. The war in Europe is over, but the final chilling secrets of the Third Reich are only just being uncovered. German ambitions, once a deafening roar across Europe, had collapsed into this silence. What lies before the assembled team of Allied engineers is not merely a prototype. It is an object of profound, disturbing beauty. The Horten HO-229, the Flying Wing. A jet fighter, tailless, revolutionary, and faster than anything the Allies had in the sky. Hitler's final desperate promise of technological salvation. The intelligence reports were correct. The Germans were brilliant. The engineers stood, silent, acknowledging the genius that created this unique shape, the composite airframe, and the powerful jet engines. But the objective was not awe. The mission was to dismantle, dissect, and understand how Germany had managed to produce the future of aviation while its nation starved. The focus quickly shifted from the external glory to the internal mechanics. The initial inspection of the wing structure was troubling. But it was the methodical, clinical inspection of the main fuel tank access panel that truly froze the blood of the Allied technical intelligence team. In the drawing rooms of Berlin years before, analysts had laughed at the simple, mass-produced designs of the Allies. They obsessed over the sophistication of their own engineering, the precision optics, the complex armor. They believed complexity must always triumph over simplicity. They fundamentally failed to understand that the war would be won by endurance, not by genius. The terror the engineers expected to find inside this jet was its devastating speed or some sinister new weapon. The terror they found was the ultimate, irrefutable proof of the Reich's collapse. The discovery inside the tank was not the testament to German ingenuity. It was the structural, physical confession of their deepest logistical poverty. The general, Hitler, the engineers, they had all been fatally certain of their technological superiority. They believed they could outdesign the world. They were fundamentally, tragically mistaken. What they did not know was that, in the very core of their most advanced fighter, the precise, overwhelming mechanism for their own self-destruction had already been built in. The terrifying object found inside the fuel tank was not the technology of the future, but the final, unchangeable sentence of death for the entire Third Reich. The machine's genesis was a direct consequence of the war's desperate final stages, a truly volatile combination of aeronautical genius and catastrophic industrial decay. This is the story of the Horten HO-229 jet, a vehicle whose very existence was a self-condemnation, standing as a spectacular yet fatally compromised exception to every known rule of military engineering. While the Allies meticulously refined proven designs for mass production, the Horten brothers were chasing a radical dream: the tailless flying wing. This configuration was a marvel. It sought to eliminate parasitic drag, maximizing speed and efficiency, and, unintentionally, provided a low radar cross-section, essentially inventing the concept of radar stealth decades ahead of its time. This was pure, unadulterated engineering genius. The aircraft was designed to exceed 950 kilometers per hour, guaranteeing its invulnerability against any propeller-driven Allied interceptor. However, the pursuit of this perfection was fundamentally undermined by the single, crushing reality of the German war economy: the absolute loss of the war for strategic materials, primarily aluminum and nickel. By 1944, every scrap of high-grade metal was fiercely prioritized for U-boats, the V-2 rocket program, and the heavy armor plating of the last few remaining Tiger tanks. The Horten brothers faced an impossible mandate:
design the most advanced jet fighter in the world, yet conserve every ounce of scarce metal. This forced them into a desperate, ironic, and ultimately suicidal design solution. The Ho-229 was constructed primarily from laminated plywood and wood composites, glued over a relatively small welded steel tubing frame. This was not a minor component. The entire vast sweeping wing structure, designed to house both the precious jet fuel and the landing gear, was built by carpenters, not aircraft metallurgists. This material choice introduced a level of complexity and unreliability that contradicted the very purpose of the jet. The powerful BMW 003 jet engines, a marvel of metallurgy and thrust, were bolted to a structure that was structurally designed for minimal stress, not the high G-forces and vibrations of a jet aircraft. The technical specifications of the design demanded robust, high-quality phenolic resins for the glue and self-sealing rubber for the integral fuel tanks. Yet the German chemical industry, crippled by Allied bombing and the lack of oil imports, was producing substitutes of dangerously low quality. The resulting aircraft was an exercise in contradiction, brilliant aerodynamic theory married to structurally compromised wood. Engineers understood that wood construction reduced weight, aiding performance, but this wood, when exposed to the moisture of a European airfield, the corrosive vapors of low-grade jet fuel, and the intense heat and vibration from the jet engines, was guaranteed to delaminate, warp, and fail catastrophically in flight. The complexity of the design had finally been defeated by the sheer simplicity of wrought and cheap glue. The true, deep terror was that the technological advance itself had forced the Germans to expose their fatal, hidden weakness. The Ho-229 was a symbol of genius, but its plywood and synthetic structure made it the ultimate monument to unsustainability. The aircraft was not just a weapon, it was a physical artifact of a dying economy. No one, least of all the arrogant analysts in Berlin, imagined that this magnificent futuristic jet, built on the premise of escaping reality, carried within its fragile composite structure the unfixable, self-fulfilling prophecy of the Wehrmacht's inevitable collapse. The true, humiliating defeat for the Horten 229 arrived not in a glorious dogfight against Allied Spitfires, but in the sterile yet utterly unforgiving environment of the hasty test flight program. The machine, a captured marvel now under Allied scrutiny, quickly revealed the deep fissures running beneath the surface of German technological ambition. Early flight tests, often conducted under immense, almost impossible pressure from the desperate high command, exposed critical structural contradictions. While pilots praised its breathtaking speed and the smooth, almost effortless handling characteristic of the flying wing design, accolades that briefly fueled Berlin's propaganda machine, these positives were rapidly buried under devastating technical reports. The marriage of wood composites and high-performance jet dynamics proved catastrophically volatile. The primary cause of failure was frequently traced not to the thrust of the engine, but to structural delamination and failure caused by extreme heat and high-frequency vibration where the plywood components were bonded to the essential metal frame. The structural integrity, compromised by the substitute materials, simply could not withstand the forces generated by the jet engines. One high-profile flight tragically ended in disaster, claiming the life of a key pilot and permanently grounding the immediate development cycle. The simple reality was that the advanced engine was actively tearing its own airframe apart. Allied analysts, meticulously poring over captured German wreckage and internal reports, immediately seized on this glaring fragility. They issued damning assessments that circulated through intelligence channels. The aircraft is structurally unsound. It is an airframe that cannot consistently support the power of its own engines. It flies like a dream, but it would shatter like glass under prolonged combat stress and moderate G-forces. For the Allies, the conclusion was swift and logical. The Germans were technically brilliant, but functionally poor. The jet was an exercise in technical hubris, a fragile marvel with no practical operational future. The profound irony was that the enemy was right in their diagnosis, but fatally wrong in their reasoning. They correctly diagnosed the symptom, structural weakness, but entirely failed to grasp the systemic disease, the logistical collapse. The Allies believed the Germans were simply poor engineers for choosing wood. They failed to comprehend that the German leadership was forced to use wood and substitute materials because they had utterly failed the economic war. They could not secure the aluminum, the nickel, and the high-quality phenolic resins, glue, needed for a durable structure. This initial, undeniable failure served only to reinforce the fatal arrogance of the German high command. They saw the problem as a design flaw to be fixed with more genius, rather than a material impossibility caused by the relentless Allied air superiority and blockade. The enemy felt justified in their immediate dismissal, believing the problem was merely a fixable design fault. They failed to realize the true catastrophe. The flaw was not in the Hortens' innovative blueprint, but in the very economic heart of the Reich that was building it. A heart that was already cold and dead.
The true turning point, the decisive moment of strategic clarity, was not achieved through combat, but through the clinical, detailed scrutiny of the wreckage of the captured jet. This was the moment the Horten Ho 229 transcended being a mere aircraft and became a literal, physical confession of the Reich's imminent defeat. The revelation was profoundly structural. While Allied engineers expected to find failures related to the BMW 003 jet engines, classic issues of metallurgical fatigue or combustion instability, the truly catastrophic discovery lay in the materials that housed the fuel. The Ho 229's ingenious design was fatally betrayed by its own skin. Allied technicians meticulously documented severe structural delamination, stress fractures running along the plywood seams, and irrefutable evidence of adhesive or glue failure, where the wooden components met the metal frame. The plane was not simply malfunctioning, it was failing due to a lack of chemical integrity. The entire structure, designed for high-stress jet flight, was visibly coming apart. This discovery instantly provided the silent answer to the great question of the war. The crisis that had crippled the Wehrmacht was not lack of innovation, it was the absolute, systemic unavailability of basic, reliable resources. The engineers concluded that the entire structural concept was viable only if the Germans had maintained access to high-quality phenolic resins for durable bonding and natural rubber for self-sealing fuel tanks. These were resources the relentless Allied blockade and strategic bombing campaign had successfully choked off entirely. The ingenious design was being sabotaged by the lack of quality glue and elastic seals. This discovery instantly validated the entire logistical strategy of the Allies. The German technical genius, the ability to design an ultra-advanced jet, was now rendered meaningless by the utter poverty of their supply chain. They had solved the hardest problem, aerodynamics, but were defeated by the easiest, structural bonding. The American P-51 Mustang, technologically simpler in concept, was built with an inexhaustible supply of high-grade aluminum, standardized components, and reliable synthetic materials. The Allied doctrine was proven correct. A simple machine built with reliable, abundant resources will always defeat a brilliant machine built with desperate failing substitutes. The captured jet was no longer just a military threat. It was a powerful piece of intelligence that rewrote the Allied strategic planning documents. The failure of the Ho 229 was a clear, physical signal that the economic collapse of the Third Reich was not coming, it was already structurally built into its most futuristic weapons.
The Allies no longer had to fear German ingenuity. They merely had to maintain the logistical pressure until the German technology, like the plywood skin of the flying wing, simply delaminated and fell apart. The great philosophical victory lay in this truth. The failure of a single bond of glue proved that the pursuit of technological singularity could never defeat the doctrine of industrial sustainability. The Horton-Ho 229 was a monumental confession.
The German laughter had long faded. By the depths of 1944, it was replaced by a quiet, paralyzing industrial dread that metastasized across every facet of the Wehrmacht. The collapse of the HO 229's structural integrity was not an isolated incident. It was the stark, physical manifestation of a systemic, terminal disease that had already infected the entire German war machine. The metaphor of decay. The terror was not merely that the flying wing was fragile. The true existential terror was the realization that all German high technology relied on materials that no longer existed reliably. The sight of the decaying plywood and the brittle, cracked synthetic rubber in the fuel tank was the ultimate indictment. If the most advanced jet, the very symbol of technological escape, was secretly succumbing to rot and cheap glue, what structural integrity remained in the crucial seals of the U-boat engines? What about the quality of the steel in the late-war Tiger tank transmissions? The intelligence discovery instilled a fatal operational doubt that rippled from the high command down to the lowliest mechanic. They could no longer trust their own equipment. The quantifiable humiliation. This insecurity was brutally quantified on the Eastern Front. While the Studebaker system guaranteed over 85% operational readiness, the complexity and materials crisis guaranteed the opposite for the German side. Field units consistently started offensives with up to 30% of their vehicles already non-operational due to maintenance failures alone. The losses mounted not because of Allied fire, but due to internal structural hemorrhaging. This statistical attrition was the true escalation of terror, a self-inflicted strategic wound that was invisible to the enemy until it was too late. The Horton 229 became the final proof that German technological dominance was actively reversing. The doctrine of zero reliability and operational paralysis. This collapse in faith translated directly to battlefield paralysis. The high complexity and low operational readiness of German vehicles, driven by the materials crisis, generated a battlefield culture of zero reliability. Pilots were afraid to push their engines for fear of catastrophic failure. Tank commanders were afraid to maneuver their armor off paved roads, knowing a simple breakdown meant permanent abandonment. The logistics system, which relied on the quick movement of supplies, became paralyzed by the fear of vehicle failure. This systemic hesitation was the ultimate escalation of terror, the terror of a self-condemning system. The Wehrmacht was forced into defensive, static positions, robbed of the operational mobility that had defined the Blitzkrieg. The cost in blood and morale. The final horrifying layer was the cost to human life and morale. Every abandoned vehicle meant a unit was stripped of its supplies, exposing men to cold, hunger, and overwhelming enemy fire. The lack of reliable transport meant that field hospitals often could not retrieve the wounded. The sophisticated weapons failed. The simple, robust logistics of the Studebaker system did not. The German soldier was fighting an army whose assets were literally cannibalizing themselves, while the enemy was resupplied by an inexhaustible, standardized stream. The terror was realizing that the war would not be lost due to superior Allied tanks, but due to the single fundamental truth revealed in the Horton's fuel tank. The Reich was structurally bankrupt,
and its most sophisticated technology was merely a beautiful yet decaying monument to that insurmountable poverty.
The ultimate lesson of the captured Horton Ho 229 transcends mere military history. It is a foundational philosophical and economic indictment of the entire Third Reich ideology. This simple discovery in a fuel tank illuminates the defining split of the 20th century, the clash between the German faith in technical singularity versus the American commitment to systemic sustainability. The German doctrine was built on an aristocratic, almost feudal belief in the unparalleled value of the individual, complex, perfect machine. Their system was obsessed with precision and custom quality, convinced that one magnificent Tiger tank inherently trumped 10 simple, standardized Shermans. This wasn't just poor planning. It was an ideological contempt for the mass production and simplification that defined the modern world. Their fundamental failure lay in their inability to calculate the cost in time, resource consumption, and the inevitable failure of the supply line. Their pursuit of individual perfection, symbolized by the fragile flying wing, was the very flaw that condemned their system to internal decay. The American doctrine, conversely, was founded on the belief in overwhelming, repeatable, systemic scale. The Studebaker was not engineered for awards, it was engineered to work reliably, anywhere, by anyone, and in staggering numbers. This industrial philosophy was the practical expression of democratic pragmatism, the concept that resilience and replacement are the highest, most durable forms of military power. The U.S. proved that strategic victory belongs to the side that can consistently maintain its operational integrity and replace losses faster, simplifying complexity into a matter of mere logistics. The dueling systems, a Cold War blueprint. The two nations built their logistics around their national flaws. The German system, with its bespoke parts and fragmented, specialized production, was inherently anti-replacement and rigid. The American system, with its standardized engines and universal components, was inherently pro-attrition and overwhelmingly flexible. The discovery of the decaying glue and compromised wood inside the Ho 229's fuel tank was the ultimate proof. The ingenious design was defeated by the poverty of its materials and the fragility of its supply chain. This revelation, that economic resilience, not technological genius, was the key to global power, became the foundational lesson applied by the Allies in the subsequent Cold War. High-ranking Allied commanders, including General Dwight D. Eisenhower, later confirmed that logistics was the true difference-maker. The supply chain became the operational front line. The Horton Ho 229's structural failure proved that the pursuit of technological singularity could never defeat the overwhelming doctrine of industrial sustainability. This ideological and technical victory established the logic of modern global power. The Ho 229 proved that strategic freedom belongs not to the nation with the most advanced design, but to the nation that masters the doctrine of endless supply and universal utility. The failure of the German system was its inability to adapt its infrastructure to support its genius. The ultimate victory of the Allied system was its ability to produce abundance tailored precisely to its needs. The German generals laughed when they first observed the simple, unglamorous Allied trucks. They laughed at the basic design of the P-51. They laughed, convinced that superior German esprit would effortlessly defeat American naivete. That laughter ceased when the winter arrived and their complex, high-maintenance vehicles froze solid, permanently disabled by the absence of a single specialized component. That laughter ceased when their panzers stalled out of precious synthetic fuel, while the endless columns of identical Studebakers roared past, fueled and supplied by the boundless, unshakable economic network of a continent they had fatally underestimated. And that laughter ceased permanently when Soviet infantry, now fully motorized and mobile, encircled and destroyed Army Group Center, driven forward by the sustained, uninterrupted endurance that only the American assembly line could provide. The ultimate irony of the Eastern Front is that the failure was not a failure of courage, but a failure of historical humility. The Wehrmacht sought the singular, shining masterpiece. The Allies bet on the statistical certainty of 400,000 universally replaceable machines. They pursued the genius of the elite. They were annihilated by the common, relentless virtue of the supply chain. The final truth was discovered in the Horton Ho 229. The most advanced war machine in the world was revealed to be a magnificent architectural lie. A brilliant concept, built with scrap and desperation. The final judgment was rendered not by a tribunal, but by the decaying wood and brittle glue of the jet itself. The ultimate irony was clear. The enemy laughed when they saw the simplicity of the design. They stopped laughing when they realized the sound of their own laughter had become the final, desolate echo of their logistical defeat, carried relentlessly in the very structural decay of their most futuristic aircraft. The Studebaker US-6 was not the hammer. It was the unyielding spine, the durable, ever-present, and consistently fueled system that allowed the hammer to strike its target incessantly and without fail until there was absolutely nothing left to strike. The logistical victory redefined the meaning of power. It proved that in the age of industrialized warfare, strategic freedom belongs not to the nation with the fastest tank, but to the nation that can move the most flour, the most fuel, and the most men reliably over the largest distance. The engine had spoken, and the age of German operational dominance, having consumed its own genius and starved its own ambition, was tragically and irrevocably over.